Hi, it's Markos. Today I'm going to be talking about essays and how to study for essay-based subjects such as English and economics. So there are a lot of essay-based subjects out there, and there's a lot of subjects which you have to write essays for, even in the sciences. So it is really important that you know how to write well-structured essays that include everything that you want to talk about while not being totally rambly and just going off on a tangent. So the best way to get good at essays and at writing essays is to just practice them. However, sometimes you don't really have the time to practice essays, and that's something that you typically should do along the year rather than studying for a particular test a few days beforehand. Often people think that essays are something which you can't really prepare for the day before. However, that's entirely wrong, and I will be showing you different steps that you can take to really bring your essay preparation to the next level and get those top grades on the essays that you need to write. Obviously, this doesn't apply to unseen essays such as an English paper 1 because, well, you can't really know what's going to come up and it's very hard to study for. So in those circumstances, yes, I would say that you can't really prepare for it the day before other than looking at different techniques you can analyze and sort of the general structure. And in those cases, practicing throughout the year is the best way to go about it. So the first step in studying for an essay is to define what type of essay you are writing. This includes the tone of the essays, so are you going to be writing academically, analytically, personally, evaluatorily? These essays can also include oral, long-form tasks such as oral assignments and oral presentations, because these are sort of like essays in a way, where you have to prepare for them and sort of spew out your knowledge in a clear and concise way so that other people can understand it. And also how long your essay should be and how many components it should really include, as in how many paragraphs, and how many parts to the essay you should have. So once you define the type of essay you are going to be writing, or presentation for that matter, you move on to step 2, which is to create a mind map of all possible essay topics. And all of the topics that they could ask you about, you just spread them out onto a piece of paper so that you can really look at it visually. You can also link things together and draw connections to show how the whole topic merges together as a whole. So for English, if you are doing different works of poetry, you can link the works by the themes that they're in or the characters that are in the different works of poetry. What this does is it gives you a representation of the whole topic visually, because often I find that we struggle to study for essays because the whole subject is just too big and we don't really understand how the whole subject fits together. And reading through the topics linearly is just too confusing and doesn't have a clear path and can sometimes be overwhelming. Leading on to step 3, I would circle all of the different subsections within that topic and write out everything you know about them from memory. So this is bringing in the active recall technique that I mentioned in the previous video, which you can check up there and in the link in the description. If you are unaware of something that might be present in that subsection, as I might be unaware of all of the fiscal policies a country can take to combat a recession, I could look through the book to find it and remind myself of this. Then, like the UNPR technique, I write out that subtopic on a lined piece of paper by my side so that I can review it later. So here I would recommend going through each of the possible subtopics that you drew out in your mind map and dumping all of the knowledge that you have just very rapidly onto a piece of paper, evaluating what things you know well and what things you don't really know, and then writing these down onto a separate piece of paper so that you can review and remind yourself of these different parts that you don't really know. So step 4 is basically the reflection part of the UNPR study technique which I made, where you should go over to that piece of paper which should be pretty much full, and try to dump everything out that's on that piece of paper from memory onto a scrap piece of paper or mentally. Anything that you know comfortably and that you can comfortably explain and recite, then you can put a tick next to, and you put a star next to the ones that you don't know. Any that you aren't completely comfortable with, then you go look up in the book and you remind yourself of what this subtopic contains, and then you close the book and try to recite that from memory and explain it basically to the wall from memory. And you open the book, try to see if you're right, and so on. Then you go back to the sheet of paper and move on. After going through the whole sheet of paper, then you go back to the top again and go through the ones that have a star next to them, so that you again remind yourself and go through the book and make sure you are completely confident in your knowledge in the parts that you were least confident with previously. So step 5 would be to actually practice essay planning, where you go to past papers, or you can even make up your own essays, and you write out a very quick plan to how you would answer this question, including all scrap diagrams and basically just simple explanations of the things that you need to include, and you write out bullet points for the different points that you're going to make. You should be doing this from memory and writing everything out in short note form so you get accustomed to the rapid planning of essays that you need to do once you come to the exams. I would suggest taking about 10 minutes for a typical 1 hour long essay. However, for longer essays, then you can take up to 20 minutes of planning. This being said, speed here is key so that you get through as many as possible and you make sure that there aren't any gaps in your knowledge. If there is something that you aren't familiar with, make sure you go back to the book and you remind yourself and you take all of those steps again to make sure that you have really ingrained everything into your head. You should be able to get through most of the possible questions in a relatively short period of time just because you are going through them so fast and there just isn't that many essay questions out there. So step 6 is just more optional, and this does help me, although it might not help you, where I go through other essay questions and I mentally just make a checklist of everything that I would need to talk about in that essay. Basically make a very quick mental plan of the essay I would be writing. What this does is it accustoms me to being given a question which I haven't seen before and quickly, rapid fire thinking about everything that I need to include, so that when I get into a test, I'm given a question and I immediately know exactly what I need to talk about and exactly the points I'm going to make, so that I can start the planning phase as soon as possible and then get that essay and really well structured instead of just looking to the piece of paper and thinking to myself, I have no idea what I'm doing. So remember that for essays, to get those top grades, your knowledge does not have to be as perfect as it would for traditional tests. This is because with most exam boards, and particularly with the IB, they do give you multiple choices on the essay question so that you can avoid certain topics. So for example, for my English paper 2 mock, I was supposed to know 11 different poems by heart and really know everything surrounding those different poems, know quotes, know everything. And this was in the center of all of my other mocks. And I knew that I just physically didn't have enough time to study for all of these different poems. So what I did is that I focused on 3 different poems and made sure that I knew them basically by heart, and made sure that they were very general and they could apply to many different questions. And I made sure that I could write the most effective essays on these 3 poems. Then, when I got to the test, I knew I would be given a choice of 3 different essay questions, and that these essay questions would be very vague, because if they weren't, then it would just be unfair for some people who had studied some poets and others who hadn't. This meant that I chose 2 of the poems that I had really worked on, and I managed to get that 7 in that paper because of the time I had put in just into focusing on those 3 poems, and all of the other poems I didn't know as well. This being said, it was a very large risk that I took, and I wouldn't recommend this for all of you, particularly with subjects such as business and economic, because sometimes the questions they can ask you can be pertaining just to one topic and you might not have a very large choice. To take this strategy, you also have to understand the risks and know how to adapt if things don't go your way, and sort of make things the best that they could be without being given proper questions that suit what you have studied. So I wouldn't suggest this, and I would suggest trying to learn everything, but if you don't have the time, then this is definitely a preferable option to just knowing everything sort of vaguely and not really having anything to write about when you do come to the essay. If this video did provide you with some value, then please consider subscribing. Since it is free and it really does help me out. And if you did like this video, then I would suggest watching the How I Study for Tests video if you haven't already, because that video really goes into how I study for traditional tests such as science and multiple choice tests. That's all from me, and I'll see you next time.
There's no stopping it now, there's no facing the heat. Can't fight it or drive it, now I'm down on my knees.